welcome back everybody to the Deposit That podcast. I'm sitting here with Teru. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Oh, my pleasure. Last minute notice. I got a text late last night, 11 o'clock, like, hey, got this lady. She wants to be on a podcast. And I'm like, I love her story. Let's do it. So
awesome.
Here
Thank
we are,
you.
like less than 24 hours later.
Yeah, thanks for being patient. I showed up late.
Totally patient. We're on no time frame. So I want to know all about you. We'll start off from the beginning. Who are you?
So Teru Clavel now. Born a long time ago.
Where were you born?
I was born at Stanford Hospital in Stamford, Connecticut.
Okay.
Lived in Greenwich, Connecticut till I was 6. Moved to New York City, and then went to school in New York. And then,
What
moved
school?
In New York City.
College, yeah.
Wow, okay. So let's see. My whole history.
Uh-oh.
I went to a school that's now a different name, but it now is called Putnam Indian Field Preschool.
Okay.
I loved it in Connecticut. And then I went to the North Street School, which is still there, public school, great school on North Street.
Okay.
And then I went to the Dalton School, kind of at the time a celebrity heavy private school in New York City.
Okay.
Then my father passed away, lifestyle change, moved out back to the suburbs for
How
high
old were you?
school. I was just before my 13th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tough.
And my mom, pretty much single mom, first gen immigrant. I'm an only child.
Where are you from originally? Like
Well-
what background?
Oh, well, yeah, it's an interesting question you ask. I'm actually from America, but I'm racially, I'm
Mom.
half Japanese. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then for high school.
What do you got?
Can you just move your mic slightly closer?
Oh, I'm too far. Look
Yeah.
at that. Okay.
Good?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. No worries.
And then for high school, I went to another kind of posh-ish high school in the suburbs, Rye Country Day.
Okay.
Ended up at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire.
Yep.
Studied Asian studies, and then went on and had a bunch of jobs in my 20s. Are we going to continue on with
I'm listening. I got both my ears right now.
better than one? And then
So you went to Dartmouth for what? Obviously college, for education. What particular field, or what did you want to be when you were going from high school into college, when you grew up?
well, talking to you, it's interesting. I think all I wanted to be was an entrepreneur.
Serious?
Yeah.
Really? Even at that age?
Yeah, in high school they would have all these, like career night. They'd have all these different rooms, and
You were selling lemonade?
of course, I sold raspberries. I sold lemonade. Probably sold origami swans. I mean,
Oh my God, I used to love those, but they were so hard to make. I never made them. I always just took them from people who made them.
yeah, I probably had tons of those. Tried to sell them. Probably never sold one. I'm trying to think. I had every job. I was one of those kids. I always worked.
Is that because you saw your mom hustle?
No, I wanted to make money. I was I really, from the time I was 12, I stuffed envelopes. I was in a mailroom. I rolled up posters, put them in those tubes and mailed them. I was a waitress. I was a filer. I
So do you
scooped
think you
ice
had
cream.
a hyperactive brain? Is that why you always had to stay busy? Or you,
Probably.
Yeah.
But I also really wanted to be independent.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the way to independence in this country is through making money.
So I think that there's, me personally,
Yeah.
right? Like people look for different things in partnerships and relationships and people, right? I think being independent is the sexiest thing anyone can be because you're able to show that you stand on your own 2 feet. Now look, and at certain parts of life, right? You're going to need help, you're going to need assistance, you're going to need guidance, but standing on your own feet doesn't necessarily mean you're alone. It means necessarily sometimes that you need someone else to kind of hold you up when you're tilting or coming off path. So I think someone that wants to be independent, that's such a first start of your route to success or entrepreneurship. People forget how important it is to really stand on your own 2 feet and sometimes fall down.
Well, I realize you're a male here, but as a female, having grown up, being raised by, oddly enough, a traditional kind of Japanese mom in terms of her values. But,
Strict, right? Very strict, I would
well, strict,
assume.
maybe. I would say she just had really high expectations of me. I think it was odd because she grew up very poor after World War II in Japan, and she was, they would say probably of her generation, overly educated. She was one of the top students in her highly competitive high school, and it was kind of understood at that time that if you are, then you're not going to get married. And then worse yet, she left Osaka and went to Tokyo and went to a competitive university. So at that point, everybody thought she's never going to get married.
So I'm going to tell you what I just heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe sometimes I hear things, I process them a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But what I heard was, so because your mother was overeducated, she probably wouldn't get married. Is that because she wouldn't need to be dependent on a male to take care of her?
No, because she'd be completely unattractive to any Japanese man of that
Because
society.
because she's educated.
Because she's so too educated.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And that was even back then.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
So that was, in the 50s and
Yeah,
60s.
sure.
So she came, first ticket she got, she basically came to the U.S.
Right.
So I guess I'm saying all that because while my mom was very ambitious herself, at home she kind of had these traditional expectations of what a woman should do.
Because her parents instilled that in her.
Yeah, well, the whole society did. Pretty much this is what the woman's role is and this is what the man's role
What's
is.
your opinion on that?
Was very confusing.
Sure.
And the reason I even bring this up, I think, is because then I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then there I am in my 20s. I have these mixed messages because I'm supposed to be getting married and having children and staying home and taking care of them. But at the same time, I kind of wanted to do my own thing.
Freedom.
Yeah, and it's a really hard thing to balance, and I don't think that's just necessarily a cultural thing.
It's everywhere.
Being Japanese, yeah. So it was. I mean, Japan still has a lot more gender inequity than the U.S.
I mean, I know
does.
the Indian culture in general. Like, I was with my friend last night, and he had a big Indian wedding, and he was sitting there like cracking jokes the whole time. Like, yeah, I'm your stereotypical. Like, had a big Indian wedding, married another Indian. And I'm like, he's like, I felt pressure. My parents and my family all arranged everything. So it's interesting how some cultures still to this day, have that. I mean, you could look at it as here's like the foundation, here's how it should be, here's the society pressure. But some cultures just overstep society and have much more ingrained recommendations, if you will, as far as that goes.
It's interesting. I mean, the beauty of that is that marriage can be really hard, or it's
sure.
challenging, right? And having kids is even
Yeah.
more challenging. So if you have the support of your community and having such a huge wedding, it actually is a beautiful thing.
Sure.
But it's just the rules that you fulfill. Sometimes they can be very conflicting, the messages. So it was hard for me because then, and then in my 20s I had various jobs and whatnot, and then I get married, and then I did end up following my husband to Hong Kong with
Oh,
our
wow.
2 children, and it was for his job that we ended up there. And suddenly it was, okay, so who am I? I'm suddenly someone's wife.
So you have to reinvent yourself.
Very much so. And then
Scary.
I actually like a lot of challenges, so to me it was,
live dangerously.
well, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I like to go out and explore different places, so
Sure.
it was good, except you can't really, it's very difficult, why don't I say, to build a career when you're moving every 2 to 4 years.
Plus with kids.
With kids. So I had my 3rd child in Hong Kong, but we were in Hong Kong for 4 years, then Shanghai for 2, Tokyo for 4, Palo Alto for 2, and then finally came back home last summer. And it's through all that, and we can talk about that if it's even interesting, but in 2011, I went back to school for a master's in comparative and international education, which most people say, well, what is that? Which,
I was just going to ask that. You beat me to it.
yeah, I mean, it's comparing different education systems across different countries and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, how they're funded, the cultural practices. It's really cool because it's a social science, so you study everything from anthropology to government to economics. It's a really
So you learned a lot.
sociology. Yeah, it was really, really challenging, especially for someone who hadn't been in school for a number of
Sure.
years.
Yeah, back to different life.
Oh, completely. But yeah, so this whole thing of being an entrepreneur, it's kind of, I've always had it in me, and it's starting up again, I feel like, now that I've written my book and it's out and it's a platform for something further. But it did definitely have to be put on
Tell us
hold.
about this book you have out. When did it come out?
It just came out last month.
Wow, it's recent.
Yes.
What's the feedback been so far?
Well, the people who talk to me about it,
Sure.
and I get a lot of fan mail, and people say
that's
it's,
cool.
yeah, it's cool. It's people say they love it because it makes them rethink how they're raising their kids. And so it's basically about what we can learn from the parenting and educational practices in the countries where we lived. And I always enrolled my children not in what typically expatriates will enroll their children in international schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I enrolled my kids in the local public schools where we lived. So we lived as locally as we could within kind of our
Which I
constraints.
believe in, by the way. I agree with
Yeah,
that.
it was awesome. It was a full immersion experience. And
Yep.
Japanese is my first language. So in Japan, it wasn't nearly as difficult to navigate, although it definitely had its challenges.
Do your kids speak multiple languages?
Yeah, so they are trilingual in English, Mandarin, and Japanese.
Wow, it's valuable.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It's like 3 little assets.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
we'll see. Certainly for the future of this country.
Sure, of course. Yeah, oh, right, for sure. What
Yeah.
are they into? Like, what are your kids all about?
So let's see. Not to pigeonhole them, which is exactly what I'm about to do.
That's all right.
My oldest, he's a really good first child.
Okay.
So he
Helps out.
I don't know if he helps out more than the others. I would say he does right. I mean, they all rebel at certain points, but for the most part, he follows the rules and he knows what's expected of him, and he wants to do right. He's a pretty ambitious kid. I'm really proud of him. If I were to ask, if anybody were to say, what's your number one interest, he'd say baseball.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does he play?
He plays. He's the first baseman and relief pitcher.
Oh, wow. Does he
Yeah.
want to play on, like, college and try and hit pros one day, or?
I think he's a little more realistic. I think
Yes.
he likes it. He
Sure.
loves
It's his
it.
passion.
It's his passion, but he probably
Did
will
that
do
come from
something else.
you or his father, or is it just something that he picked up on his own?
It's funny. I think raising kids, you have to watch what they like. And when they were still really, really small, and we would walk around Central Park, he would just stop at the batting at the
Softball fields.
Yeah,
I was probably playing.
you were.
Yeah.
What
So
do
I
you
used to
play?
play like 140 softball games in Central Park by 63rd Street every year for 5 years straight.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah,
there you
from
go.
25 to like 30. Let's
Well,
call
then
it.
I'm meeting
Yeah.
the genesis of my son's
Oh, it's
baseball
awesome, yeah.
career.
They used to stand behind the dugout, like
Yeah.
watch, sit in the stands. Like in the middle of the day, there's like it looks like Yankee Stadium packed. People are on both sides. It's pretty cool.
That is
it's
cool.
Really, it's really cool.
Yeah.
That's all about community.
Yeah,
It's all about
that-
community and
that's
like
amazing.
coming to one isolated location.
What team did you play for?
So I played for Gotham Comedy Club. This was great. So I've been in real estate lending since I'm 20 years old. I started in December 2007 when I got cut from my college football team. I played at Fordham University in the
Yeah.
Bronx. I got cut. And I'm like, what am I going to do? So I get into residential mortgages, another collapsing industry, right? At 20 years old.
Wow.
So I killed myself until I was like 23, 24. Like, and then I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die by 30 if I keep this pace up. And I was hitting crazy numbers, making a ton of money, running
Wow.
profit and losses for banks, like just crazy stuff. And I'm like, my passion's really sports. Like sports came to an abrupt end, and I kind of just put it away. I kind of like closed that in my mind, that chapter out, even though it wasn't closed. Like the door kept reopening, and I played for Gotham Comedy Club at 1 o'clock on Mondays, which is awesome. I played for CBS Sports on Wednesdays at 1, which is really awesome. I played for Halstead Real Estate one night a week. I played for the Actors Fund, which is the Broadway show league, at 3:30 on Thursdays. I played double headers down in the Lower East Side, the East Village, like on Fridays.
So many questions are popping into my head right
hold
now.
on, what do you
but
got? And then double headers on Saturday in the Men's Central Park League. But what I did it for was to be a part of different people's lives. So like Mondays were actors, like they're all real get people, men and women, but their profession was acting or comedy. And then, CBS was cool. Those were like writers, editors, ESPN guys, guys that were in the sports world that were still living the dream to chase, right?
Uh-huh.
And then Halstead was obviously real estate. I did more Halstead for like friendship and networking because I could get business from them. I ran their team, which was pretty cool. Being like, in the Actors Fund, I was around Broadway. So like, Al Pacino's daughter plays in the league. Like really cool people that you probably wouldn't be like usually in the same room with hanging out, but we use sports as that commonality. And then in the East Village, those were mostly like bartenders and stuff that had like odd end gig jobs, which is cool because I never had an odd end gig job, in my adult life. So I got exposure to them, directors, TV producers and stuff. And then Saturday was like just straight like Dominican, Puerto Rican, Central Park softball league, like playing with the like, some of the top talent in New York City. So it gave me different walks of life to like kind of be a chameleon with. Yeah, so it was really cool.
I just have so many.
What do you got?
We should turn this around. I'll interview you now.
All
so
right, we can flip it around.
wasn't there a conflict of interest if you're playing for so many different teams?
Well, they were all different leagues. So Central Park, so I was told that New York City has something like 600 different independent softball leagues, all different stadium, or, places, fields, stadiums. Some are on Roosevelt Island, some are in Long Island City down by the waterfront. So it was pretty cool actually playing in different, tournaments and stuff with people because there was a lot of overlap. So maybe two guys from this team played on two guys from this
Oh
team.
my God. So were you the ringer?
I was.
What'd
yeah.
you play?
So I'm an outfielder. I got a pretty big arm. And in our first game, it was super funny. Like, no one ever knew me as an athlete. They just knew me as, like, the mortgage guy. They knew I was, like, younger. They're, like, 35 to 55. So I was playing left field. Like, they didn't know where to place me. And, like, I went in, like, all right, I'm just going to come and play. That's all. I'm just here to play, have fun. They're like, oh, you go in the outfield. You know, they put all like the people they don't know in the outfield. Go catch balls.
Yeah.
So I caught a ball in left field, and there was a runner on first base, and he didn't know me, and he tried like tagging up against me, but he didn't go back in time, and I threw him out from left field at first base, and everyone was like, "Do you want to be a center fielder? Like, do you want to like help us run the team?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." You know, it's awesome. So there's a pretty cool like story on how it all came about. But that actually got me into, you know, like what my passion was, and like still actually taking care of like my mind and body, and not just focusing on work all the time. It really helped me like focus on the work-life balance.
So, did you actually have a job at that point? Because it sounds like you're a professional softball player.
So yeah, so you know what's interesting about mortgages and real estate, most of the game is done after hours, right? You know, people work during the day. So when you have to like, meet people or talk to people for an extended period of time, you know, 5 to 10 p.m. was the busy time. And in the morning, like 8 to 12, like before work while people are getting settled in. So I found a way to like use my dead time, if you will, for my own time. So even in today's world, I go to the gym during the day and I block out specific times that are usually busy for, you know, my main businesses. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So as far as education goes, let's get back to the education part. I know that's really what you're big on, right? Classrooms, education, like the whole schooling system. I want to hear your opinion, okay, on what the 3 biggest problems are today in schooling in America, all the way from preschool through high school.
That's a lot of questions.
I know.
Okay, well, we have a problem from conception in this country because it's really hard to grow out of the socioeconomic environment that you were born into. And it's only gotten worse. So the intergenerational mobility has gotten worse over the last generation, so the last 30 or so years. And it wasn't like that when I was growing up. I mean, you could still have the American dream and be born in an unlucky circumstance and have an education and have greater opportunities. And now that doesn't happen because there's so many blocks. So it starts with your lack of community resources, the lack of funding for babies' childcare. And when you have, let's say, a dual income earning family or you have a single parent, it's really obviously challenging to raise a child. And then,
I don't know how you could have a single parent household. So I have a 1-year-old,
Yeah.
and I'm not with his mother, and it's difficult having him when I have him 50% of the time, like doing it one-on-one.
Exactly.
It's impossible. I'm gonna say it's impossible. Like obviously it's done. It's very challenging.
It's super, super hard. So when you have
Plus the cost of daycare and everything
the
else.
cost of day and so right from the beginning, and a lot of times, unfortunately, you as a child, you may not have 2 educated parents, let alone one
Right.
who's raising the child.
Right.
And there's, you know, sadly but truly, you know, if you don't, the more educated you are as a parent, the more you can pass that on to your child through all kinds of educational experiences and knowledge and taking them places and exposing them to different things, right? So it happens really early on. And then you talk about our inequitable funding model of education in this country, where on average, 45% of funding for schools comes from your local tax area, and then you have 45% in general from your state, and then the remainder from the federal government. And so obviously, if you're living in a place that doesn't have really high property taxes,
Screwed.
right? Property values, your kid
screwed.
is going to end up at a school that is not being funded that well. And I traveled the country a couple of years ago and visited schools, and those that are underfunded, I mean, there are no textbooks for the kids. If they have a smartphone, they're doing their reading on their smartphones. Kids usually go to school because that's where their socialization takes place.
School hasn't been renovated since the 60s.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, there's-
purple, pink, and blue bathrooms.
Absolutely. And, you know, as long as you're safe, I actually don't think you need to spend that much money on
Sure.
the physical,
The appearance? Really? You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think I don't think, I very fervently believe and know the most important money you can spend in a school is on the teacher
Interesting.
and getting the best teachers in that classroom.
That's an interesting point. So my brand, so I have 2 brands. I have the Mortgage Quarterback,
Okay.
which is a pretty cool brand. I incorporated sports into mortgages.
That's
I quarterback people to help get them the right mortgage for themselves.
Oh, cool.
Right?
You're
Kinda like-
talking to kind of a non-football person, so not even
so
kind
like
of like a
so
non.
coach guides. You think of it as like the Mortgage Quarterback is a coaching program, if you will.
Oh, okay.
Right? So I became the expert, and now the Mortgage Quarterback, like the quarterback on the football field, says when I get the ball, who I throw the ball to, where I tell you to stand. Think of it as like the general on the
Yeah.
field, right?
Okay.
That's where it came from. And then I have deposit that, which is the entrepreneurial side, obviously the podcast. And that's more of like hey, here's like the one thing I want you to deposit. Here's what I want you to add to your life, personal and business. So I relate everything back to sports because I truly believe in my heart, sports, when run properly, in today's world, even for the past, I'm 32, so for the past 32 years, has taught me and people that I know much more about life and how to succeed in life than any schools that my friends went to, whether it's Princeton, Harvard, Dartmouth, Cornell, you name it, high
Sure.
upper echelon schools. It comes down to what I believe, like, people have a reactive tendency to fill a void. What I mean by that is, hey, I know how to do one thing great, but we don't need that. We need you to be the janitor. Okay, well, we're going to put you in this role that you don't know. You're not the expert. And in schooling, it's like, oh, our math teacher up and left us. Bring this history major over and just fill that void. Now they're the math teacher, and now the math teacher doesn't know math. They're literally learning it as they're teaching the kids. And then eventually when they do learn it, they're like, well, I want more money. And most teachers, from what I've learned, I have a ton of friends that were teachers. I'm at the age, right? Everyone wanted to be a teacher, have had to get out of that because the income doesn't give them the ability to really live. Yeah, they have summers
Sure.
off, but they're living basically in poverty.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think about that? I mean, how do you allocate the funds appropriately?
So the funds should be towards recruiting, retaining, and training teachers. It's the most important expenditure for a school district, for the government, for state governors. Please listen to me, because those are the only people right now who actually have any power in creating an equitable system. So basically, if you get, I can tell you, in Japan, for instance, there are 38,000 spots for 200,000 applicants.
Wow.
And what they have to do is comparable, to become a teacher is comparable to passing the bar
So they're
or your
competing.
boards. They're competing, but the bar is so high. In Japan, an elementary school teacher has to swim every kind of stroke in the pool because they're the swim teacher. They have to do everything on the monkey bars that a kid does. They have to be able to do the twirly, twirl, twirl.
Sure.
They have
Can you do that?
I used to.
No
I
more?
used to. No, definitely not anymore. They have to be able to sight read, sight sing, play the keyboard because of the music teachers, and every teacher in Japan knows how to do that.
Wow.
Let's see. And they have to be able to teach all the subject areas, right? It's the bar is just so high. So if you brought something like that to the United States, where we respected our teachers,
Teachers aren't respected.
they're not respected. But can you imagine if the bar, if your child was going to a school every day, taught by someone as educated as your doctor, you have a lot more respect for them
Right.
automatically.
And you wouldn't question them.
You wouldn't.
Right.
But here, when the bar is so low, and when what the saying is, when you can't do, teach,
Right.
it's already setting up the system
Right.
for failure.
It's a fallback option.
It is, and it's such a shame. And then the next step is not only do you have to bring the best and brightest into the profession, then you have to keep them, right? Which means
retention.
paying them,
Yep.
right, and giving them a career path.
Resources, voice, all of it.
All of it, but we don't have a career path for them.
So what's interesting? So
It's like it's the anti-entrepreneur, right?
Complete
Because you're
opposite.
told
Yeah.
fifth grade,
Absolutely.
you're a teacher for fifth grade,
Yep.
and stay there for 30 years.
that's it. No evolution. You're
Nothing.
at your ceiling. You're capped out.
Yeah, and we'll incentivize you to keep it that way because we're offering your tenure. And guess
so
what?
you can't leave.
Well, you can, but
can,
then
but you're
but then
gonna
you
throw it
lose
away.
all your, guess what?
Sure.
And when you tap out of the system at whatever age it can be for your area,
Sure.
you're gonna get all the benefits, pension, everything. So just stay that way.
So, again, I have an interesting story. Like I said, I started in the collapsing market when I was 20 years old. Now,
Yeah.
when I tell you I knew nothing, I went from chasing footballs to catch, I played wide receiver, and girls in college, right, to hustling mortgages in literally the worst economic times, second to the Great Depression, they say, right? We were in a depression, but they
tough
called
time.
it the recession.
Really bad time.
Terrible.
Bad career choice.
Best career choice.
I'm
And here's
joking.
why. Well, here's why, right?
Okay.
So I was able to give a 20-year-old's perspective, right, when everything was collapsing. Like, I spent the night Lehman Brothers actually officially closed with my best friend in the car who now works at Goldman Sachs, watching the people from Lehman Brothers walk out of the building like ants. And I'm like, what caused this? What caused this? Why did this happen? I'm like, I'm 20, but I want to make sure this never happens again. because I wasn't making money, because I was making more money than everyone my age at the time, because I worked my butt off, right, to go out there and learn the business. I had to, if you wanted to make money from '07 to 10 and 11, you needed to learn how to structure a mortgage loan and like how to like have resources and call in favors to get things done. You had to be creative and think outside the box. That's probably why I never liked school. So when I wrote my book, The Mortgage Playbook for Millennials, yeah, you could learn information from it. Yeah, I have a cool story, some say. The main purpose of it was really to show the collateral damage that occurred due to lack of transparency and education in the real estate financial system, because nothing existed. I'm like, okay, how do I learn this? And you have some guy that's sitting in a $2,000 or $3,000 suit driving a Bentley, like, I don't know, let's go get another mortgage loan. I'm like, no, can you explain? And nobody would take the time to explain it because there was no transparency, right? And I'm like, whether you're in your mother's womb or you're 5 years old or 12 years old or about to go to college, you were negatively impacted by the collapse of the market in 2008. I don't care what anybody says, because everyone felt that pinch, which then trickles down to parents getting laid off, foreclosures, losing the homes, not having enough money to put food on the table, tension, divorce, and everything else, all due to lack of education. And that's really what it boils down to.
But so I'll throw this back at you. Why do you think there is that lack of transparency?
That's a good question, because the money didn't want transparency. The money that was behind everything.
It's the corporate interest.
Without a doubt. And that's why I've always been, bank owners have always hated me, because I've always brought honesty and transparency to an industry full of, I'm going to use the word crooks. Not everyone's a crook in the industry, but people that are commission incentivized. And I always relate like the mortgage business on Wall Street to drug dealers. Like you have your big kingpin on Wall Street, and they take advantage of desperate, live life by the seat of your pants individuals that need to make a living, that can make a lot of money, to go out there and hustle their drugs for them. And then they bring the money back, and unfortunately the victim is the user, and unfortunately in this case it was the homeowner, and it's just super sad. And people got away from the importance of the American dream, which back in the day was home ownership, So seeing all that collapse and how it really impacted everybody, including the country, and we're still 10, 12 years out from there. People are still not fully recovered from that time frame.
Oh, they're still not recovered at all.
And they say they are, and they're not.
They're not. But you can think about, and I'll put that back to the equity issue too. So from that time, states still haven't equalized to pre-2008 spending levels
At all.
at their schools.
Yep.
And what else you see happening is, so there's not a lot of transparency when it comes to student loans.
Yeah, at all.
Right?
Yep.
So what you do is this country pushes, and I will say I do not think everybody should go to college in this country.
Me either.
And especially with the sticker price as high as it is.
$250,000.
It's ridiculous. It's absurd.
Yep.
And most countries, their higher education institutions are free. The top ones are free, and they're public.
Wow.
Or they're relatively free, especially
Sure.
in comparison to here.
Sure.
I mean, you're spending $5,000 or $10,000 a year is a drop
Nothing.
in the bucket
Yep.
compared to
Yep.
here. But most are actually free. And when you think about how we're setting up this, the millennials are how we're setting up, what are they doing? Even if they make it through high school, they're now encumbered with crazy student loans. They can't afford to buy a home.
Well, it's for the government to control them.
Well,
They say if you burden somebody with debt, you're more able to be controlled. But what they don't realize is until they go postal, and now all of a sudden they don't care, and now they can't be controlled, now there's anarchy.
well, that's an interesting point too. But I think it's, when you look at why I bring up private institutions versus public is because there's no transparency.
Right.
If you are a private Ivy League institution, although you are a nonprofit, you don't have to disclose your admissions policy, your need blind policy.
Nothing.
And there's this big gap in the middle. So not many years ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a whole need blind admissions practice where and then they said, okay, so if you make under a certain amount of money, then you can come here for free. Well, let's examine that for a moment, because if you are making, let's say, $50,000 a year or less, of course, college, it's
Has to be.
it's the same price,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah.
your income. So you have to, but then let's look at how qualified those students are, right? And then they come to college, and then they need a lot of resources, and the colleges aren't prepared necessarily to give them
Too much work.
the support
Right.
to get them college ready. So they end up dropping out, and they're still, they don't have necessarily the skills, or they feel disenfranchised, the whole thing. Now you're looking at the middle class. So let's say you make what you may think is a reasonable 6-figure salary, unless you have more than one child. You still can't afford to send your kids to college.
It's impossible.
It's like this whole country. It's like and whose interests? That's why I always ask whose interests are being met. And I think about this, and I tell parents and educators, when you look at the newest curricular reform or the newest tech innovation that you're putting into your classroom, the latest textbook, the latest bouncy seat that everybody needs to have.
The Vosu Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, right? Or the latest jungle gym.
Sure.
Do they really need it? And that's why the facilities thing, I mean, when they talk about spending...
That's a like shiny item though, you know?
It
Like,
is.
oh, look what it is. I remember, so funny story. Do you remember when smart boards first got implemented?
Of course, yeah.
So I was like, I think I was maybe a freshman in high school. It was like 01, 2000, 2001 range.
Yeah.
And I remember like, oh, our whole school got smart boards. Half the teachers couldn't use
They
them.
didn't know how to use them.
So I'm like, wait, we're sitting here looking at this $8,000 whiteboard and they're putting it up to write with chalk or with like a marker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a classic
Waste of
example.
money.
It is. But you're a football player. I mean, how many places spend tens of millions of dollars on a football stadium when the classrooms can't even
'Cause that
afford to
drives in
get
the revenue.
textbook? Well,
I'm not, I agree with you, but that drives in, but from their standpoint, some guys are getting greased, if you know what I mean.
well, at
in
the
order to get-
college level. But if you look at the local, even the high school
Sure,
level,
sure.
why does it happen? Because you have a bunch of people who on Friday nights want to go to the high school football game.
Yeah, gather around.
You know, and I would say you don't need to spend that much
Right.
money in the football stadium when
Right.
the kids don't even have the proper teachers, and
Sure.
the teachers are striking because they're working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I
To
mean,
survive.
that whole this country. But I will say, I want to go back to something you said about how sports taught you so much that you could never have gotten in the classroom, and I completely agree with that in this country. But I think it's so sad that has to be the case, because right now, when you look at the way we're educating our kids, they get 5 chances to get mastery, which is equivalent of an A. And I talk about this in my book, World Class, but when I was growing up, everybody knew who got the A. It was deserved. It was the kid who worked their butt off,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
In these days, everybody can get an A. It doesn't matter if you're working, you just have to keep trying until you get an A. And the thing about sports, although there are 12th place and participation trophies, which I completely disagree with,
Hate it.
right? But there's a winner,
Yep.
and that's life.
Has to be a winner.
There has to, and that's, I don't, these days we're teaching kids to be unprepared for the real world.
Yeah. Unrealistic expectations.
It's like, because everything comes at my terms. It's personalized
Sure,
learning. I can
sure.
always get an A. The
Sure.
world is going to be waiting for me. I can go
Everything's
straight to,
handed to me.
yeah, and I can go to the president of the company
Yep.
whenever I have a complaint. And,
Yep.
I don't blame, I'm sorry to say, your generation of millennials, because that's how we're educating them.
You're right.
And
You only know what you're taught.
yeah, and I don't know, it's like we're hurting these kids, but there's so many teachers and administrators and department heads, and we have Twitter battles over this because they think we should give our kids so many chances.
No.
And they'll say to me, they say, well, it wouldn't be fair if we didn't let someone who failed the bar not take
Sure.
it again. And I said, maybe, but at the same time, if they failed the bar 3 times, I certainly wouldn't want them to be my lawyer.
Right.
Nor would I want someone who didn't pass his medical boards to perform open heart
Did they
surgery on
take
me.
it that serious, or are they really qualified for the position?
Exactly. Maybe we're doing them a favor by saying you should look for another job.
I have 2 funny stories that I think you'll appreciate.
Yes.
So I actually posted this the other day. So I had a coach. I've always been raised with tough love, like from my dad. My dad grew up with no father and an abusive alcoholic brother. So my dad only knows tough love, and that's what it is, and it is what it is. I've come to realize my own patterns as a new father. My son's 1, that I don't like and didn't like, and how I have to like do the opposite. Like, if you don't like something that's being done to you, you probably shouldn't do it to other people, including your family, right?
Yeah.
So I was like a chubby kid growing up, but I was
Oh, hard
quick.
to imagine.
Yeah, I know. It's a long story. I broke my ankle last year. I'm down 20 pounds, super fast now. I'm in really good shape.
So
Now,
it was a great thing.
It was total like blessing in disguise. Right. 2 weeks before my son was born, I broke my ankle, shattered everything, plates, screws, you name it. Playing softball, and
Many lessons.
yeah. So my favorite player was a guy by the name of Deion Sanders. His nickname was Prime Time. I don't know if you know who he was. He was like this show-off guy, best athlete on the field, high step, dancing to the end zone. I was this little fat kid, So I'm like, if I ever get an opportunity to score a touchdown, which I'm probably not going to at this early on in life, I had to be like 10 years old, let's say. I'm going to high step my ass into the end zone. So I played defense. I took the ball out of the quarterback's hands. I broke through the line, literally took the handoff from the quarterback, which is unheard of. And all I see is just open pasture to run to score a touchdown, right?
Yeah.
So
It's like Forrest Gump.
yeah, I'm like, I don't even realize what's happening, and I wound up high-stepping my ass into the end zone, like Deion Sanders did, like I'm just like a little 10-year-old fat kid celebrating his like only touchdown ever so far in life. First touchdown ever in practice. So the coach is calling me, Jeff, get over here. Get your ass over here.
You went to the wrong side?
I come up, I think he's going to congratulate me. Best thing
yeah.
ever. He's like, if you ever show off like that again, you will never play for me. Grab my face mask, and I peed in my pants. I literally peed in my pants. I was 10 years old, and literally that was, I tell you, like one of those moments you'll never forget. I could check back mentally into that specific moment where we were standing on the field, and he instilled the fear of life into me. Instilled the fear. Yeah, and I was like,
Fear of death or life, yeah.
Fear of both, I think. I was alive. I felt more alive, right?
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, this is important to realize. I never celebrated again. I scored plenty of touchdowns after that, but I never celebrated again because of that moment. And that year we went on, we had a very good team. We were one win away from going to Disney World for like the Pop Warner National Championship. We came in second place. And the trophy we got from second place was bigger than any of the first place trophies we ever got. I mean, it's a national level, huge trophy, big thing. And I didn't put it up next to my trophies, even though it was the biggest trophy. It said second place, But that's like how I was raised. Like you either win or you don't. Like first, second, third. Like if I didn't get number one on it, I didn't want it.
Wow.
But most people like, oh yeah, biggest trophy, number two, or take the plaque off, or like try and hide behind it. But that really comes down from like a sense of insecurity. I think sports allowed me personally to be confident with what I did on the field. Like you show up, you perform. Doesn't matter what color you are, how big you are, what you look like, you perform. And I grew up in an all-white town, and we didn't have a football team. And the town that was adjacent to us was half black, half white, but mostly all the black kids play football. So white town, white kid growing up, going into an all-black town, obviously it's a
Where was
culture shock. Somerville in Jersey. Okay. So a small little town. Like you don't know, but again, it wasn't about black and white. It was about community. It was about the parents coaching together. It was about the parents watching the games together. And I think experiencing that early on and going through the trenches together with another race, for example, like taught me early on, it doesn't matter male, female, doesn't matter black, white, pink, purple, whatever you are, like it's a human connection and interaction, but it's all based around community.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful thing that sports does bring
together. My question is, how do you bring that tough love sports into classrooms? Because today we're in a sue happy world where you can't say anything to little Johnny, who did something wrong. How does that change? And how do we even police officers are going down that route too, but how do we protect the authority? Not saying police officers are right or wrong, people have their own opinions, and I respect everybody's opinion, but teachers, like if a teacher's in a position to reprimand a child or do something and they're trying to prove a point, and a teacher usually spends more time with a kid from K to 8, let's say, probably than their parent does, right? Because they're with them 40 hours a week, like a full-time job. How do we give that teacher that confidence to make that decision to parent that kid?
It's such a hard question because some teachers are capable of it and some teachers aren't. And yes, teachers get penalized both by literally, they break the law if they touch the kids these days, right? And then there are some kids who do act up and are very disruptive to the learning, and they have rooms, closets now where they are actually, these children are allowed to physically be locked into in some places. Seriously.
What are your thoughts on that?
The whole system, it's horrific.
I can think some people like to lock in closets though, not kids, people, adults.
No, but when you see these little rooms,
sad. That's terrible.
It's like, what does this country come down to? It's
pathetic.
It's shocking. But then you see, I've gone into classrooms where there's like a teacher sitting there behind an iPad. I'm like, hello, today I'm going to be reading to you about.
Seriously.
And nobody's paying any. I wouldn't pay attention to that.
Out.
It's horrible. So, I mean, and then maybe get a disruptive kid in that classroom. But wouldn't you be I mean, it's so hard. It's such a case by case situation. But I would say so. I did tour a very well respected, but sometimes, let's say, they call this charter school system, this school in New York, very too tough, too disciplined, I should say. But when I visited it, I thought it was brilliant for the kids who need that discipline. Maybe they don't have it at home, they don't have that structure.
It's true.
It starts very early in the day if your parents have to go to school or go to their jobs earlier. And they have a great after-school program, and they don't waste a second. So what you're talking about when they have smart boards and teachers couldn't figure out how much time is wasted on that, right? This school, the transition, I mean, it was so fast. I had like whiplash. It was like 10 seconds between between math, between English, between chess, between going to a classroom, they line up, it's regimented. All their work is lined up on the wall and they see it, and it's really high level work.
Do you like that? Do you agree with that?
See, so I couldn't put my kids in there
Right.
because my kids get plenty of discipline at home. So to have it at school too, and to be in that kind of such a regimented place,
Too much.
it is too much for them.
I think it's too much. Also, sorry to cut you off. Is
No.
when we get into what people don't realize is when you get into the real world, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the career that you go into, right? A lot of jobs and careers today are
Yeah.
very flexible. Like it's not a 10-minute block out of your entire day. It's like, all right, I have projects to do, but no one gives you like 15 deadlines a day unless you're in that career. But like, especially if you work on commission or work for yourself, like you go from being, okay, you have 7 classes a day for 4 years straight, and you had 12 years of school, and before that, you're told what to do every step of the day from the time you wake up till the time you get home, if you will, and then you're on your own. How do you personally create that schedule? How do you personally create your work-life balance? How do you manage to go get groceries and still get your dry cleaning and still be home at a certain time? No one teaches you that.
But I think that is something that has to be developmentally appropriate, right? Something that I
Really?
see often is if you are never taught how to organize your backpack, how can you ever figure out how to organize your bedroom, your desk, or your life?
Can't.
Right? So I think what we have to do in this country that we are not doing, maybe, of course, there are pockets of people who do and classrooms that do, but start at your preschool level. Figure out, this is where you put your dirty cup or, your shoes, or just organize your little bag that you take to school.
Start simple.
Start very simple, but we don't do that. And I think right now it's like, especially, oh my gosh, with the advent of technology, it's so hard for
Right.
kids to stay
Right.
organized because
Right.
they don't even physically see where things go.
At all. But
And-
then usually in the morning you have a tired mom or dad, messy bed hair, whatever, waking up one eye open, packing little Johnny's lunchbox, throwing stuff in, right? And then throwing the backpack in, like disheveled, honey, we're late, grabbing you by the ear to get by the car.
Yeah.
Not in every household, but in
No,
many
that's pretty
households,
standard.
it's pretty standard, but that's like that fast-paced, like chaotic world that people create. And I think that, again, if a kid sees that, they're going to go in one or two directions. I'm just giving you my opinion on this. You probably have proof and statistics otherwise.
No.
But like, if little Johnny sees that, little Johnny's going to be a mess like what he sees, or he's going to be like so OCD that like everything has to be lined up, color coordinated, over the top of what he didn't like growing up.
I could see that. I'm just thinking about that. I just think not all parents are going to be super organized,
Sure.
and there are parents who work, and there is going to be
They
last
say
minute
people
stuff.
who are not organized are actually more creative. Is that true? I heard like the messier you are, the more creative and free spirited in thinking you are.
It could be, but I don't
No
know.
proof behind that.
I don't know, but if you aren't organized and creative, can you actually monetize that creativity?
That's good. Maybe start projects and never finish them.
Yeah, and you have to have such perseverance, and if you want to be a creative in this world,
Right.
you have to deal with tons of rejection.
Daily.
And
Yeah.
you may not ever scrape 2 pennies together to rub together.
Sure,
So.
sure.
The discipline has to go hand in hand with creativity if you want to
That's
actually
an
make money
interesting word,
from it.
discipline. So I've come up with that over the past couple of weeks. It's been like a reoccurring word that like kind of sticks out. You hear it and you hear like a ding, like aha moment.
Yeah.
So again, sports teaches you discipline. If you don't show up, you get penalized or you get punished, or you're running until you throw up, or you're running until like your legs can't move anymore, or whatever
You
it might
feel
be.
it physically, yeah.
In your perfect world, how do you implement discipline to the different age groups? So let's say from 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 to 12, and then 12 and on. Like, how do you? Because I feel like you have to start slowly, right, and gradually implement it. How would you start disciplining those age groups?
So here's
personally,
I would preface this all by saying I feel like in this country there is some weird association where if you are disciplined or being disciplined, you cannot have any fun in your life.
correct. I used to get grounded for weeks at a time, and I used to say another word, and I'd be grounded for a month. I think I was grounded for 6 months in like the 8th grade. I couldn't leave my house.
Okay.
Oh, like,
I mean, people
but
too.
sure.
I mean, yeah. I think your parents would be arrested for that for these days.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. So, I feel like kids can sit still. They actually can. You just have to engage them in something that's interesting, and please don't put your kids in front of an iPad and be a couch potato
That's the
all
quick
day.
fix, yeah.
Give them
Yep.
a book to be,
Yep.
completely entrenched in whatever's going on in the book. And it's just, I feel like, because I've seen it in Japan, the kids typically in preschool, it's a very, very play-based preschool system in Japan. So they run around and they play, and different age groups mix, but they're also taught to very much take care of their own things and to take care of each other. It's a really beautiful system
Like
that
friendships.
way. Well, it's
Or a community, like you said.
a community.
Yeah.
Literally, like during cleanup, you don't just clean up your stuff. You help clean other people's areas, and they kind of have had chores. And it's not just about yourself. And then in first grade, though, it's the typical, everybody has a desk, and you sit at your desk, and you sit still for however long the classroom time is, 45, 50 minutes
So no
a period.
talking, nothing. Just
No talking. But something we, again, don't do in this country well is we don't challenge kids to the aptitude they need to be challenged.
at all.
Right?
So they get in trouble.
So that, yeah,
Or act up or whatever. Or show
lot
off
of-
or joke around.
exactly.
Class clown.
And teachers are thrown with kids of different levels, so that is definitely challenging. By the time the kids, when they come in kindergarten or first grade,
Sure.
you have some kids who've never used scissors and some kids who are reading chapter books.
Or
You
bring
know-
machetes, whatever.
Oh my God, that's a whole other issue that they are now dealing
I know,
with.
I know.
Right? So again, and I'll go back to, if you have teachers who have gotten masters and are literally able to also become engineers, doctors, or lawyers, they are far more qualified to handle a classroom with different abilities coming in than somebody who got maybe a 2.0 and couldn't hack being an engineering major. Right? And I'm not saying it's the teacher's fault either.
I get it.
It's our fault. It's our society because
We allow it.
we allow it. We don't elevate the credentialing process to require high standards. Right? So talking about discipline, I think kids, if when you're turned on by something, time can fly for, you can sit at, there've been times when I'm sitting in front of my computer and writing, or I'm taking notes or working on an article, and I don't move for 12 hours. And I don't know where the time went. You get totally lost.
Yep.
Or when you're involved in something and then,
Yep.
wait, you got to go now. What?
Yeah.
What time is it?
Yeah, we just started.
Yeah.
And
that's what we have to put in. That's what every time, that's what the goal should be for every time you have a child in your classroom. You've got to get to that point where you challenge them and excite them to want to learn. School isn't boring. I did a workshop recently, and I have to say, I was very surprised when I asked the group of parents, I said, and there were about 20, 25 people in the room. I said, so why do your kids go to school? Why do they think they go to school? And a few times I heard, because it's the law.
I would say that, yeah.
But that's such a sad answer to me.
Terrible.
They're only going, what about you are setting them up to be, they're passionate about what they're learning,
Social.
lifelong learning, socialization, learning how to, do math and read and be engaged in our society, learning how to participate in a democracy, learning how to debate, having civil discourse. I mean, there's so many skills, learning how to appreciate art and fostering creativity,
Sure.
music. I mean, there's so many things, but you're going because it's the law?
Sad. Do you find that people say it's more so the law in underprivileged communities, like, oh, my kid has to go to school, or do you find it in every community?
That I don't know.
There's no
I
correlation?
don't know. I think it's families that don't have higher level conversations with their kids about the beauty of an education. And maybe the parents didn't have great educational experiences.
Right.
So maybe, I don't exactly know where that comes from, other than that conversation that has to change.
So I feel like one of your goals, I'm going to make your own goal for you. I'm just pulling
Oh,
this out of you.
cool.
I already tapped into your brain, so I'm going to pull out what I got,
Yeah.
right? Is I feel like you want to change the overall curriculum and education experience in America. Is that your number one priority right now?
If I was to say
If you had carte blanche.
carte blanche, well, I would say equitably fund, and I don't mean all of our schools, so every child has an opportunity, and that requires a gazillion different changes. I mean, it requires making sure, Johnny from a socioeconomically disadvantaged area has a lot more money spent on him per pupil than a child from an affluent area, because guess what? The affluent area child has parents who are probably educated and have all the resources, and Johnny has none of those resources, so to make it equitable, you got to spend more on him.
Interesting.
Right? So fixing that and changing the pipeline. I mean, in this country, we are so culturally shifting that mentality of the pipeline, and we're so self-involved. Like, what's in it for me? How am I going to get to, well, how's Johnny going to get to college? Because Johnny may be the next Nobel Prize winner, and
Sure.
what's going to happen to Johnny
Sure.
if we don't?
Well, I think an important thing, like, again, I relate things back to what I know. So for 32 years, I know sports, and for the past 13 years now, I know mortgages and real estate, right? And I think a great example of, like, taking care of your neighbor in your community is, okay, the four of us have our house on the block, right? And you go into foreclosure and your house sells for $200,000 under market valuation because it's not in good shape. Well, automatically that drives down the price of your house and your friend's house and your other friend's house, right? So like having an vested interest of your community and neighbor and neighborhood succeeding, like it goes much further between like, oh, I want to get ahead. Well, I can get ahead of all you guys, but if you fail, I'm then going to be impacted by it indirectly or directly. And I just think it comes down to, again, teamwork. Like you could be the best player, but if you're scoring more points than the rest of the team and we're losing every game, who cares if you scored 100 points if we're losing every game, you know? And I just think that people do need to get back to that community, do need to get back to that neighborhood, you know, like I always like walk around and call people, hey, like, what's up, fam? You know, like what's up, brother? What's up? You know, and like create that. But where do you believe that, because obviously you've studied this, where do you believe like that system got broken? Because at some point, I mean, we went from being, from what I knew, 100 years ago, very secluded, like everyone's stuck to their own selves, community. Now everyone's living amongst each other. And I feel like there's like a lot of unspoken tension and resentment. Do you find that?
Well, if we want to have a history lesson here, I think it was during Ronald Reagan.
Okay. I didn't know that, so I just learned something.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much about privatization and capitalism, and you see what's happened since then, even with our education. I mean, Ronald Reagan wanted to get rid of our Department of Education.
Wow.
And when you think about, you know, every man fend for himself kind of capitalism, in our country, I mean, we're seeing now, it doesn't really work. We have to take care of everybody else, and right now we have a system where corporate interests are the most important. You know, we see them, oh my gosh, if you look at something that I think is fascinating, is if you go, so Miami-Dade has the fourth largest school district in the country.
Miami-Dade, yeah.
Miami-Dade. And if you go to their Miami-Dade, literally the district website, I mean, it's a corporation.
Yeah.
I mean, they run food service, transportation, police department, everything, right? And they have a web page for lobby groups that come in there. That, you know, and so you have corporate interests who are going into the classrooms, and for the last academic year, Apple went in there, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, maybe
Wow.
6 or 7. And so they have to list every time someone comes. And so when we talk about, you know, where it all fell apart, I would say when it became the me, you know, and look out for yourself kind of a place where now we don't have communities. And it's not just people who you may not be related to. I mean, now that we're so spread apart with so much more, I think, economic opportunity maybe, you know, we don't have intergenerational homes, or we're not living near our
at all. It used
our
to be
parents.
like great grandparent here, grandparent here, mom and dad live across the street, kid buys a house next door, and now you have a whole little family, like the nucleus right here.
Yeah, and even in the neighborhood, right? Your neighbor
Sure.
used to be like, hey, you know, I have to go run an errand.
Yeah.
Can you watch Jane for
Yeah,
me?
yeah.
And now if you leave Jane home alone, the neighbor's going to call the police.
Correct.
So it's sad. It's really, really sad. And the only way we can rise as a society is to stop this growing gap. And I tell you, I fear it's only going to get worse.
I agree with you.
You know,
I think it has to get worse before it gets better.
and we need this wake-up call. It's pathetic to me that the whole varsity blues thing happened. But what was even more surprising was that it took so long for it to be uncovered. And not only that, people are like, oh, well, you know, now it's not going to be a problem. To me, it's just going to go deeper underground.
It has to. Well, I think that's a problem with America and a lot of industries, right? People like to just, you know, blanket over what the issues are, put the carpet over it, and then before you know it, like there's a hole in the floor, and then you step on the carpet and you fall right through. You know, it's like smoke and mirrors. But I think I do truly believe that's every industry. And it's so funny. My friend, he's got 2 kids. He's got a senior daughter in high school and a freshman son in high school. And we talk pretty much every day. One of my go-to guys, really, really good dude. And when we talk, he's like, well, what can we do to help these kids? What can we do to help these kids? You know, my son's a freshman. My daughter is, you know, going to be going to college. They're both great. You know, they're both good athletes. I'm like, well, ask if they have any type of like credit or financial literacy in school as far as like moving forward. He's like, no. This is a couple months ago. And just last night he texted me. He's like, my son just texted me saying they're going to implement some type of like teacher. They're going to implement a teacher to teach credit to these kids, right? And I'm like, oh, that's great. So basically they're going to take a teacher that doesn't know about credit and have them teach these kids about credit. Like, how does that work? Now you have somebody who's not an expert teaching these kids on what to expect. And it's a big problem because people don't know the intricacies of it. I can tell you that when I was 25, I got a call from a guy who ran Tiffany's real estate at the time. Tiffany's. He was the guy that picked out their next locations. Had a master's from Columbia Real Estate School. And the questions that on paper, this guy's 45 years old. You would think he'd be like a genius in real estate. The questions that he was asking me were so basic that he didn't know the answers to. I'm like, how did you get a master's in real estate? Like, I didn't graduate college. I didn't. And I failed math twice. That's why I didn't graduate college, believe it or not. And I'm writing hundreds of millions of dollars in mortgages. So like there's no correlation between like going and getting your master's and everything else and teaching and being that expert working for a $1 billion company and me, the kid that failed that football, that failed math twice, now educating you on that as the expert. But that shows that the experience is a little bit more valuable than reading it from a book.
I think it's an American story. Right? I don't think this can happen in many places. And I think you are so rare. I don't think many people these days can share your experience.
Correct.
And maybe
That's
you
true.
had parents.
At this age, at least.
At this age. And I think you probably had parents who still were tough on you, educated, supportive.
So no one in my family ever graduated. I think they get both out their GED. No one ever graduated college in my
that's
family.
remarkable.
My parents are so pissed at me still to this day because I didn't graduate college.
Of course, I could understand that. It's their dream too.
Me too. Like, I get it. I did it more for like a spiteful, like immature reason. At 20 years old, like you cut me from the football team, I'm gonna mess up your graduation rate. It's kind of like an ego
I'm sure
thing.
Your parents
it was
probably
personal.
had heart attacks.
Pissed. I mean, like still to this day. I
Yeah.
don't talk to my dad, but part of the reason is probably because of that deep
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
And I get it, but I'm like, well, you didn't graduate college, and look what you did for yourself. So you kind of have that tug of war, but back to parenting. I think parenting is really where, I saw, like you said, roll up your sleeves, right? And again, I can only speak from a year and 2 weeks of having a son. Forget the 9 months of like my son's mother being pregnant. That's a whole other story. But being a parent, right, what I noticed is you have to lead by example, and they're mirror images of you from a kid's standpoint. And parents, I believe, are so not present, whether they're on their phones or their computers or just watching TV. What are your recommendations to parents to actually be role models and parents? How do we get parents to actually parent their children?
Well, a line I like using is your kids can't raise themselves. So just think about that. Who do you think is raising your kids? The teachers, the school? No, you are.
Social media.
Well, a majority of information that the kids get, and I'm talking a heavy majority, 70 or 80%, is social media and YouTube. And let's think about who's editing that through. Nobody. Nobody's looking to see if that stuff is real or inappropriate or any of that, right? So to me, we have to do what everybody is not doing right now for the and when I say everybody, I'm just majority. It's family time. Make family time. It's really not that hard, right?
Do you do family time still?
Oh, all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Give us your schedule.
Well, the kids actually, they go to school different times. One leaves a lot earlier than the other, so one is actually out the door when the other wakes up.
Okay.
And then I have a third who's away boarding school, who's older. So it's a little different. But so then they go to school and then they come back, and dinner is always family time.
No phones, no
Oh,
TV.
for sure.
Nothing.
None of that.
Do you guys converse the entire time?
The entire time.
What do you ask?
Well, they always talk about school and their friendships, what they learned, if they had quizzes, their assignments, what they find is cool, what book they're reading. Of course, they tease each other, they're kids.
Yeah.
I'm smarter than you. I'm, all
Food
this other
fights or
stuff.
Not really?
Oh, forget it. Oh my God, in my house,
Not happening?
I tell them my chair is stained. I go crazy. I make sure they have napkins on their laps. But it's really good. It's really important.
Shoes off at the front door?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that a culture thing, or is that more of like your rule?
I grew up that way, but
Yeah.
it's. I think everybody should take their shoes off, especially if they live in New York City.
Okay.
But it's family time, and we have one room. I believe in this as well. If you have, and we've sacrificed a bedroom for this. We have an office in my apartment. We live in New York City, and everybody has a desk in that office, including where I work. And every day we sit at our desks and we do our work.
Wow.
So that's family
What
time
time
too.
frame do you do that?
Any time in the evening, because
Who picks that time?
They by themselves because they have different schedules.
Yeah.
So they'll have an after school activity.
Oh, so it's not like everyone at the same time goes
But
in.
we end up there at the same time
So
typically.
you all gravitate there.
Before dinner and then maybe a little bit after dinner. And everybody has different amounts of work to do too.
Sure.
So they stay there longer or shorter, but that's our place. And then it's, then we all see what everybody else is doing. What kind of work.
Now, do you personally discuss finances, money, business with your children? And if so, at what age did you begin, navigating those conversations?
So probably because I was a daughter of a post-World War II mom who was terrified she wasn't going to have enough money.
I think everyone is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's been deeply entrenched in my brain. So I say when my son was still in a stroller living in New York, my second wasn't born, so he had to be under 17 months old, but he walked way too early. So, but we would go to the grocery store every Monday morning. It was perfect time at the time because they restocked it, right? First thing, I don't know when they did, maybe late Sunday overnight. All the shelves are full. Nobody's in the grocery store on Monday morning.
Empty, yeah.
Totally empty. And I would do the week's grocery shopping with him. And I remember I would have one cart I pushed in front and I pulled one in back. And I would park the stroller and he would run around and we'd talk about where everything was, what everything was, and how much everything was.
Really?
Yeah.
So he would look at price tags and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we'd weigh stuff so that he would know, if it costs, sometimes grapes and cherries are really expensive and they get you by the per pound. It's not by the pack,
Yeah.
And we talk about that. And even if they don't understand, I would do the math with them. I do the calculations. We talk about percentages and discounts. And yeah, literally when he could probably barely put two words together. But I think it's really important. I don't want him to be the guy who's like 50 years old going into the supermarket thinking a cucumber is a zucchini.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Especially if you're going on a date, And, I mean, then you're dependent on somebody. So what's interesting is, again, I think you definitely are a product. Everyone's a product of their environment, right? And people make decisions, and I don't judge. But, my mom and dad split up, like, basically when I was born. They were together since they were, like, 16, 13 years old, way back when. So they split up when I was born. My dad had a girlfriend for a time. Then my dad left her. Supposedly I broke them up when I was 5 years old. Whatever. Like, told her to get out of my house. It was my dad. I wanted my time with my dad, right? So I'm like, you gotta get out. Kicked her out.
That's a tough thing
Kicked
to
her
say,
butt out.
to
But then
hear.
he got with somebody 20 years younger than him. So he's like 40 and she's like 20. And I'm like,
Are you repeating history, by the way?
am I repeating history?
Yeah.
I'm telling you a story.
But maybe you're repeating history with your life.
We're getting there, right? We're getting there. Settle down over here. So I'm like, okay. So my dad was always self-sufficient. Did everything on his own. Cooked, cleaned, laundry. Like, when he obviously did well for himself, he would like pay people, a maid or whatever. But I never looked at, this is kind of crazy, I never looked at a female as a like partner from a financial standpoint because I didn't see that. Like still to this day, he pretty much takes care of my mom. Like I've been out of the house since I'm 18. Like says a lot about him. He's a great person, great human being. He's always a provider because he grew up with nothing.
Yeah.
But I didn't see that give take. Like I'd be at my mom's house, I'd get in trouble. She would call him to ask how she should punish me. I'm like, he wasn't even here, Like, why you gonna like poison the well now? Like, he shouldn't be mad at me if you and I got into an argument. So like, even though they lived in separate households, they still, I'm gonna say co-parented, but he made the final decision. How do you feel people have a balance back and forth of dependency, codependency, and also how you manage that give and take in a relationship, managing kids?
I think it's really hard. I've not mastered that.
You haven't.
No. I think it's really hard. And I think there's so many factors at play when you have kids.
Because you have your way and then your partner has his way.
Absolutely. And I think it's just stuff that doesn't come out until you have the children typically. And these are conversations I think you have to be having before you decide to settle down, get married, and have kids.
Isn't that more like hypothetical though? Like you're planning for something that you
It
don't
is
even
so
know.
hypothetical. And it's really, really hard. And I think you have to look back at how you were raised to figure out if you want to replicate that or you want to change it up. And nothing splits up a family more than having kids, ironically.
I know. I'm with you.
Right?
And it's the best thing in the world too. The kids, my son's the best thing in the world, but
it's really, really hard. And I think today, especially with what's going on in the world and figuring out who the right male and female or non-gender specific or there's so many
or what
transmutations.
male wants to be a female, what female wants to be a male.
It's very confusing right now.
Super confusing.
For us, for our kids, at this time right now.
Like whose role is what?
Very much so. And, there's so much research that women do a majority of the household work, even if they're even the majority breadwinner. And then you have men who were raised in traditional homes who expect the women to do that and be that. So it's great. You can work, but you still have to take care of everything.
Right.
And I think we don't have role models with people who've managed to balance it all out. But then again, you look at our times, and we are, unless you're in that 1% of 1%, you have to make money. You have to, I mean, how are you, there's no parent who's not terrified of how they're going to pay for college.
Or daycare or food.
Or daycare, any
anything.
of it,
Yeah,
right?
correct,
Private
correct.
school.
Especially as an entrepreneur.
I mean, it's a really scary time to be thinking about that. So you talk about dependency and independence, and every day you have to assess. I think it's really hard. If there's a formula, I think that guy would get really rich.
Or girl, female, woman.
I meant male or female. I meant that very gender.
Are you familiar with opportunity zones at all?
No.
Not at all.
Well, I'm familiar with economic zones, but no.
So it's actually very interesting. So back in 2017, so backtrack. Before 2017, the government came out, pretty much, when I say the government, the higher ups, if you will, came out and said a lot of America is underprivileged, undereducated, and the real estate living standards aren't even close to par, if you will, right? It's where the term gentrification comes in. Now, gentrification by definition, I'm an educator as well, and I hated school. I like giving the backstory. So gentrification by definition is basically just raising living standards to like par level. It's not making them, the Taj Mahal. It's basically taking like a slumlord and bringing it up to, okay, I guess like if I had to live here, I'm safe living here. Ceilings aren't collapsing and everything else. The effect of gentrification is displacement. Now, people who can pay $500 a month for this, collapsing ceiling apartment can't now afford to pay $900 a month for this safe apartment. So the $500 tenant then gets kicked out of their community, their home, now has to relocate, life all up in shambles, okay? So the government came out and said, hey, we need to solve this problem, okay? We need to figure out how we upgrade America, if you will. So every governor was given the ability to designate 1/4, so 25% of their state as a designated opportunity zone. So let's say you go into New Jersey, for example, or right here, I'll give you New York City. So they took the census from 2012 and they said Bushwick and Williamsburg, Brooklyn today are underprivileged, underdeveloped, everything. As you know, they're not. They're most expensive because that gap happened so quickly from 12 to 17.
I see.
They used old data for it. Now, they said, well, we need to have this privately funded. Like, we're not going to raise the money ourselves. We need to bring in high net worth individuals to come in and, change the areas. So they basically gave high net worth individuals the opportunity in the opportunity zone to defer their capital gains for a minimum 7 years, and it's a 10-year plan into these underprivileged areas. So if you sell a bond, a stock, or a business, you're able to take that capital gain and you have to put into a qualified opportunity zone fund, which then deploys into an opportunity zone. Part of that comes into it is our ancillary businesses. So education. So if you're going to develop this underprivileged area and you're going to get that tax benefit, what type of social impact are you going to bring? Are you going to bring financial literacy? Are you going to bring how to build your credit score? Are you going to create schools? Are you going to create jobs? Are you going to create health and wellness? Are you going to do all these things? And so far, there's a lot of unknown about it. It was passed in December of 2017. But I feel like with what you're looking to do, we should definitely talk about getting this funded by people's capital gains and develop the educational curriculum, to try it out in these underprivileged areas. And I think that, people have to do it anyway. And if we were able to get funding behind it, we'd be able to spearhead that and have test cases.
So where it's happening, you said, in Bushwick and...
Well, it's every single state has it. 25% of every state has that. But Bushwick, Brooklyn, that's an example of what it is here. It obviously doesn't make sense. Like a lot of the South Bronx is, there's parts of Pennsylvania, and obviously most of it's down south, like Alabama, like really underprivileged areas. But you're able to go in and get funded for a social impact to give back. So I feel like this is kind of like part of the initiative.
Interesting to learn more about it, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think could, at least catapult what you're looking to do to move forward and get a shot at creating that.
I'll look into that.
Yeah, so qualified opportunity zones. Yeah.
Okay. That
So
makes sense.
deposit that. The whole story behind that was on the football field one night, thinking of a cool podcast name. I was 3 years in the making of trying to figure out the name for a podcast before I launched it, and it came to me. Deposit that. So deposit that means to deposit one thing to the listeners, the viewers, to their memory bank that they can implement into their either personal life or business life or both from our guests. So what's one thing you want to leave everybody with that can make them a better person or have a better quality of life?
If it's for everyone, not just parent, teacher,
It could be that.
child,
Whatever you
stakeholder
want.
specific,
Yeah.
I would say I feel right now we are so, and we talked about this as a theme earlier, we're so entrenched in who we are within ourselves right now that we're not looking at the bigger picture. And if we do zoom out and look at what's going on, not just with our president and Ukraine and Syria and Iran, and I mean, you have to think about, okay, so what does this look like for the next year, maybe 6 months, 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years, and maybe 20 and so forth, because what world are we creating and what world are we creating for our children and what does that look like? And right now I feel like we are so stuck in our own heads, and some people are scared, some people feel empowered, but what we're really creating is a generation of kids who aren't going to be able to survive in the world we are creating for them. And while we are showing all of our vulnerabilities to the world, the rest of the thriving world is moving ahead. And what we are doing right now with such a split country is we are creating much more damage for years to come than we will be able to get out of. You know, it's that one step forward, 3 steps back kind of a thing. So we have to be prepared for this, and everything from what's your kid going to do? Do they know what's going to happen when it's the middle of December and it's 80 degrees, or it's the middle of the summer and it's 130 degrees? Are they prepared for that? Do they understand, do they have the basic content, factual knowledge to be able to survive in the future when, guess what? Their Indian and Chinese counterparts are literally going to be 3 to 5 years ahead of them in math, science, all this other stuff. I mean, when we don't invest in the arts, which we're not doing in this country in terms of education for our kids, the first place that funding gets pulled is for the arts.
Yep.
And if anybody goes to any of the artistic institutions in New York City right now, what do you see? You see 70 to 80-year-olds in Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall. There's nobody young, but young people aren't being taught to appreciate these things. Or you see people from other countries, a lot of European and Asian nations, and they come and they appreciate it, and they're much younger.
Right.
Go to our museums. Who's painted the paintings on the walls or the sculptures, the photographs, and look at who's attending those museums. There are not a lot of Americans in there.
Interesting. So Americans really should just try and take on someone else's culture and just follow, like, get in line and follow someone else's path because it's proven to work.
Well, we can't hook, line, and sinker take another, but we have to look at the bigger picture of what's going on. I mean, there are people that I've met who say, you know, right now the world currencies are pegged on the dollar. I've met people who've said in 10 years it's going to be the Chinese renminbi.
Wow.
You know, if you think about, you know, if we set up this trade war with China, not if we are, and if you look at the countries that will have to take a side, they're going to have to do it based on economic reasons.
Correct.
And the largest trade partner for most countries is China. So what are we doing in this country?
Interesting.
We have to, and so I think about our kids in this world, in our country, and how are we preparing them for this? You know, I don't think we are. And like we talked about, you know, participation trophies or second place trophies, or everybody being able to succeed, or no discipline, or having that grit, or learning on the field, or learning wherever you're learning. If we thought it was tough for us, this next generation, it's going to be much tougher for them.
Big trouble.
And
so,
yeah.
As far as your book goes, where could everybody find your book?
Oh, thank you. So World Class, it's one mother's journey halfway around the world in search of the best education for her children. You can find it on Amazon. I'm on social media. What am I? LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can go to my website. I have a Simon & Schuster author page. But really, I want to have these discussions with people. So reach out to me.
And we'll get you added to the website. We'll put like the direct contact information
That'd
on
be
you,
awesome.
link to
Yeah.
the books, all that stuff.
But I think even if you disagree with me, which I think is totally normal
everyone has
because
their own opinion.
everybody has their own opinions, we have to have these conversations and we can't get our backs up. We have to, because the bottom line is our kids, and I don't think there are many people who think the public school system in the U.S. is thriving.
Right.
And if you are, I'm sorry,
the
you're
proof is in
kidding
the pudding,
yourself.
right.
It is. And every year when we look at our international standings, we're either in the middle of the pack and stagnant or falling.
Not going in the right direction.
No, we're not. And so people who say we're doing works, it's not working.
Maybe we could team up and come up with our own curriculum, you know?
Well, that's another problem. I think lots of people who aren't in education
Yeah.
actually try to go and fix education.
Of course, we have to. I mean, they have the ones with the experience.
But exactly.
You
so
got to bring the
people with
entrepreneurial
experience-
mindset into schooling. I don't care what anybody says. It can't be black and white. It has to be very gray.
It probably does. But there need to be a lot of big fixes, and we got to get the right people involved.
So we're definitely gonna have to have you back on the show for a follow up to this. You know, I wish you the best of luck with your book and everything. I better
appreciate
get a
it.
signed copy.
No, my gosh, I
And,
don't think I brought a copy, but
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll
I'll
have
have to
everybody
find
reach out to you, and we'll have them follow you on all your social media and stuff.
That's
But it was truly a
awesome.
pleasure getting to know you on last minute. And if I could do anything to help you, you have my full support.
Yeah, well, since you work in the mortgage business, I know some brokers have asked me to come into
I
talks
only
for
I
their.
only advise and consult now. I'm done with all banks. I don't trust banks. So when the
Oh,
market
there you
collapses, I
go.
want nothing to do with them.
There you go.
But
All
I
right.
appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.